So we had some difficulty with our audio, so I'm going to read the questions out to you. The first one was, how would you describe yourself as a poet? Tell us a little bit about your spoken word journey.
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to figure out who I am as a poet, to be honest. I started, I guess, getting interested in it, particularly spoken word, around my mid-20s. Um, I saw a clip by a really amazing poet named Stacey Ann Chin, and her poem "If Only Out of Vanity" just kind of blew my mind, and I was like, wow. I wish that I could express myself in that way. And then I started listening to a lot of like the early sort of Def Jam stuff, like uh, Kanye West did like a really great one. Um, and then also I think it was Erica Badu. Erica Badu did a really great poem as well. And I was just really inspired by it and thought, wow, like this is amazing. I want to be a part of this. They're really cool. I'd written some poems before, but I hadn't really done anything to kind of put myself out there and really share it. Um, and then I think in 2016, I finally had some courage to attend like this kind of variety sort of nights where people were also sharing spoken word. And I actually shared a poem about the shootings in Orlando, the shootings that happened at a gay bar in Orlando. And it was a poem called Dear Omar Martin, who was the terrorist. Um, and it felt really, I guess, liberating to kind of stand at this intersection of being a person of color, being a queer person of color, and then being a creative, being a poet, and being able to kind of use my voice to say, you know, being here in this intersection is very complicated, and the feelings that I'm feeling right now are very complicated. Um, and a few people came up to me afterwards and they were like, wow, like I that totally, blew my mind. Like and it would capture how I'm feeling. And yeah, just to me, it was a totally kind of new thing to be able to provide words, I guess, to myself, but to other people as well. Um, and then I went to Slamalama. I think it was I didn't make it in July. I was late, and I was really upset. So I didn't get a spot, and then I automatically got a spot in July. I mean, in August 2016, and there were so many amazing poets. So I wasn't expecting anything. I was like, okay, I made it through the first round. This is like really cool. I'm really happy with myself. Um, and then I think I ended up winning that night. So yeah, I was like, okay, maybe there's something to this. Maybe like I'm not as bad as I think I am. Maybe maybe I have a bit of a knack for this. So then yeah, like I guess I I've tried to continue keeping up with it, but I do think like I've underestimated myself. Like I've been a bit intimidated, um, just because we have so many great poets in the Melbourne scene. And I think in my own head, I've kind of set a bit of like limitations at times. So I'm trying to overcome that. I think that's my biggest thing at the moment as a poet is just trying to overcome those limitations that I've kind of set in my own head.
I am super aware of the fact that we had quite a few technical difficulties throughout this interview, and I just wanted to take the moment to apologize for how that negatively affects the viewing experience, and thank you for giving us so much grace. The next question we had was, as artists, once we put our work into the world, I personally believe it takes on another life, a life in which we are no longer the sole owners of the work. Do you find that your relationship with your pieces changes once you release them to an audience?
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially like when you're not kind of comfortable again in all of those sort of intersections of your life where you're trying to figure out answers in those other sort of places, and you do want to express that and you do want to use that because that's when you're most vulnerable, you're most raw. But again, putting that out and sharing that does leave you in sort of that space of um is this for me? And um now that I've said it and I've said it out openly, I can't take it back. So I think it's as amazing as poetry is at times. It's also sometimes I think we can get caught up in the creative and like the moment, and then after that, sometimes kind of have to deal with the repercussions of saying it out loud or like pushing past our boundaries. And I think that's the amazing thing of being creative, right? And with poetry in particular is it does push you outside of those boundaries or those boxes that you've built for yourself. But then once you stepped out of that, it's kind of like, oh shit, like I can't really go back now.
Here, a discussion kind of ensued about the ways in which we bare our souls while we're sharing our work, and how, as poets, it feels like the propensity for work to kind of exist forever in the digital age is quite scary, given that our opinions change, our personalities change, our views on things change as time goes on, and how that very much comes into our practice, and how sometimes it means that we share parts of ourselves we kind of regret in a fun little way.
Mm-hmm.
And that the conversation kind of veered into this territory of feeling as though oftentimes our work is a snapshot of us kind of frozen in time.
Yeah.
It's a part of us that is old, and sometimes it's difficult to navigate that persona with who we are in reality.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of the stuff that I've written about mental health, I think initially when I wrote it, it was obviously came from a place of vulnerability and also as a person of color, I think sharing it with family and friends at the beginning, um, I knew it was important to do it, but I was quite scared. But it's interesting because now I've seen, I think more, yeah, more sort of people relate to some of that stuff that I've written around mental health, and oh, that's exactly how I was feeling, but I didn't know how to express it. And so I think, yeah, for me, that stuff initially I felt very weird about putting it out there because I felt very vulnerable. I felt very kind of like, oh, like what are people going to think about me? But there was something inside me still pushing me to do that. And I think now, like a year later, when I share it again, I feel very empowered by it. Because I think also society has evolved a bit in terms, and particularly amongst people of color, in terms of talking about mental health. I think our generation has started to actually realize the importance of having conversations around mental health, getting professional help. So I think, yeah, for me, um, definitely the stuff that I've written about mental health, I've seen kind of evolve in the way I've thought about it. Initially being, yeah, very kind of scared and vulnerable and like, oh fuck, like what are people gonna think about me? Um, to kind of now being like, okay, like I'm really glad I shared that because now years later, people like come up to me and they're like, Thank you for sharing that. Like, it helped me a lot. I had someone recently who bought about 4 of my books, um, to give to two people in her life who was struggling through, really bad episodes of depression. So yeah, I think, particularly when it comes to that topic, the evolution for me has been really great.
Over here, I simply agree with all of Alushka's points because they were really valid, and there was a discussion that ensued about how our relationships with our pieces, more often than not, in my experience, change over time. And sometimes that change is positive, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it just is. Sometimes it is just this not linear type of different kind of relationship that we have with the piece that means that we view it differently, and how interestingly that actually affects the way that we perform the pieces. And that's the beauty of performance art and being on the stage, because there can be a piece that you perform at 21 really impassioned and really angry and very fiery, and then you might perform the same piece in a later season of your life and it might be quiet and it might be really, really slow, and you might pause a lot and give a lot of space for the words to land, because now your relationship is quieter, it is more content with that thing. And then again, because it's not linear, you might actually experience a season in your life later on again where you become very impassioned again, so it becomes a third iteration. And I think that was really, really interesting, and the fact that Alushka brought up a really positive experience was really useful to that conversation. Our next question was, you entered the scene in 2016 when you became the Slamalamadingdong champion at the time of the August Slam, and were able to open up for the APS, which is the Australian Poetry Slam Victorian final. How would you describe your relationship with Slam, and how has it changed over time since you first started engaging with it?
I think particularly with slam, I I think, yeah, for me, I just, obviously the slam is, I just see a very important place for it within the poetry scene, but I do think to some extent it's become the kind of be all. Um, like, uh, it's all, or at one point it was for me at least, right? Like, I think a lot of the opportunities were around slam, and it was around like being the best and putting yourself out there and like trying to compete and stuff. And me having again had success very, very fast, very quickly, with entering the scene, and then not being, I can't win every single time. So as for me, yeah, like the relationship, particularly with slam, became a bit frustrating for me, um, because I couldn't keep up with being the best all the time. Um, and that's fair enough. Like, obviously, you do get emerging poets who are like, who you would hope are better than you. Um, just because it's amazing to see people approach things differently, and you learn new stuff from people who are entering the scene, and things like that. But then yeah, I think for me now, my focus is on trying to exist in, I guess, spaces that welcome the storytelling behind poetry without necessarily engaging in kind of a slam environment. I think perhaps later on in another year or two, I'll be ready to kind of enter that environment again. But I think for myself right now, the opportunities that I'm looking for, and also the opportunities I'd like to cultivate for others, is around being able to share your art, share your storytelling, again, perhaps use it as a um, and coming out and being able to like be in a safe space where you can share your vulnerabilities without being judged, without kind of the stigmas around stuff, again, like mental health, around sexuality, things like that. So for me, right now, I think the most important thing in the next year or two is trying to build up more of a community that's engaged with storytelling and with being supportive of each other and using, you know, um, visual art and then spoken word being one of those, um, visual arts that we can use to kind of, yeah, just create conversations and engage with things that are going on around us, versus like trying as well does put a lot of pressure. I think, especially for people who want to like share their poetry, and I've seen this a lot. To like Slamma, and they might be like, "Oh, I really want to share, but like I'm scared because like I'm not good enough, or this is my first time," um, and like it's really sad to see because like sometimes you look up then you're like, wow, what the fuck, like you're amazing. um um so I think, yeah, like I do want to kind of create that environment that allows people to kind of go into it first and then perhaps, yeah, like get a bit of experience, build their confidence up, and then be able to approach like slams.
Here, there was like a mini little discussion about how slam is
Mm,
often the
definitely.
way that a lot of people, especially
Mm,
marginalized people,
definitely.
get into the poetry scene, especially in our context, people of color. This is kind of their gateway into getting recognition, and how the emergence of the open mic has been really, really helpful, especially in recent years. Places that are open for BIPOC people to kind of share their work without being judged or having to be, the epitome of excellence, where they can come and they can share as many times as they need to until they're confident enough
Mm,
and have molded their pieces enough to kind of come on the stage,
mm,
is actually a really, really, really useful thing. And that, at Griffin Speak, that's kind of our mission, is to create these spaces for people to be able to come and share their work and do it in a low-key, low-pressure environment, so that then if they want to go on to slam, they can. If they don't, then they can stay in the comfortable little abode that we create for them. The next question was, you released your debut collection, Stardust, last year through Bookleaf. Tell us a little bit about your publishing journey, what it entailed, and if you had any advice
yep,
for people who were also wanting to embark on
yep.
a self-publishing journey like you have. Yeah.
Yeah. So Book League actually has an interesting kind of competition that they do every year. So yeah, like for me, I'd actually really recommend giving it a shot, especially if you're somebody who's not, I would say, disciplined in really putting stuff together and then getting edited and stuff. They offer you all these services, which are really awesome. So yeah, so basically you have to participate in this competition and like submit a poem, I think for about 20 days consistently, for about 20 days or about a month consistently. And if you don't do it consistently, then you're automatically out of the competition. Yeah, so you kind of have to, yeah. I do think they give you a bit of leeway at the end if you missed out on like one or two. Um, so yeah, so you kind of put it all together, and then at the end, if you have submitted all the poems that you're meant to submit, they'll put it together, and then they'll ask you like either you can just get it as a book, or you can engage in like extra services. So I paid for editing, and then I paid to also get a illustrator. So yeah, so for me it took a bit longer, it took a few months, because I wanted to engage, yeah, like with the editing service and with the illustrating services and stuff like that. So then I worked with the editor first, and once the editor kind of gave me the final copy, then the next stage was I worked with the illustrator. So I was a bit particular with the images and stuff that I wanted. And I think, yeah, maybe my illustrator got a bit annoyed, but I yeah, so that took me maybe a month, a month and a half just to do the illustration stuff. Um, and then after that, about like another month to kind of have it, all together, kind of go to print. And then actually early this year, not last year, but like I think January, maybe it was December, January. I can't even remember myself now. It went to print. Um, so Bookleaf, yeah, was really great in that sense. I mean, I'm having some issues with them at the moment, I'll be honest with you. Um, just because like they've taken some stuff down off like Amazon and things. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on there. So a bit like in terms of responsiveness, I don't think that great. So I would, if like if you're into like self-publishing, I would say the process, at least, if you take away what Bookleaf's done, like the process at least is uh, the poems that you want to share, whether it's like by theme. For me, I kind of wanted it to be all over the place. Like I wanted the emotions to be up and down. So the poems that I shared weren't necessarily thematic, like they weren't grouped together by theme. It was meant to kind of take you on a journey. Um, so I think decide very early on how you want to kind of group it. If you want it to kind of be a bit all over the place, or you want it to be thematic and in sections. So start off by doing that. Then obviously, the second stage would then be like engage with an editor if you can. And obviously, not everyone has the means to do this. So like look around. There's a lot of like great editors and illustrators and stuff that um, you can reach out to that are overseas to help you with some of those costs. And then once you've done your editing, perhaps, yeah, like engage an illustrator if you want to do that. Also, like designed your cover, all of that. Then look at like some cheap options in terms of printing. And I think, with self-publishing, remember, it also gives you more control. So like with Bookleaf, at the end of the day, I still have to pay in terms of sales, the majority of the money still goes back to them because I have to pay for the printing and stuff, right? So, I think those are considerations to make. So yeah, definitely look at what options you printing, what costs are going to be, and then from that, obviously, you can work out like how much profit you'll be able to make, and yeah, like how you can sort of balance a lot of the costs. But I do think for me, at least, Bookleaf was a very cheap option in terms of illustrating and editing. I think they provide me a really good package for under $100. Yeah, so it was really good. But yeah, for me, the most important thing was just to get something out to start off with, especially because I was going to be taking up a few opportunities at the beginning of this year. So I wanted to kind of have some stuff out have like a chapbook out and stuff, just so that I could use it. I was part of the Victorian LGBTQIA plus leadership program at the beginning of this year. So I wanted to like have, I guess, some stuff to like talk to my mentor about, give her an example of like my work, and then get feedback, things like that. So for me, that was a big motivator and factor in just trying to use the opportunity with Book Leave. But I would say, yeah, consider your options. If you have more time to work on it, do your research, um, and you'd be surprised at like the fact that publishing in Australia now isn't as costly as it used to be, I think.
Here we talked a little bit about the idea of self publishing and how, as artists, it often felt like we had
Mm.
to find a balance between having control over our work and having creative freedom, and obviously not really worrying about the costs of our collections going to market, and how it was a fine balance, and how considering all of your options was actually quite wise. And all of those wonderful, wonderful logistical things that we consider. The next question that I presented Alushka with was, given that your work exists across stage and page, do you find that there is a difference in process of creating art for live audiences versus those who experience you on the page? If so, how is it different? I believe I elaborated a little bit here to say that I personally find that when I'm writing on the page, I'm working a lot more with the space on the page, with things like formatting and expression are a little bit more precise. But when I'm on stage, I'm obviously working with more physical space on the stage itself. So I'm working on things like stage cadence, like the way that I project my voice, like where I put the pauses, which actually would be more things like negative space on the page. And I put the question to Alushka in the way of, do you find that you do the same, or do you find that it's different? Are there pieces used for stage exclusively and page exclusively, or are they adaptations of one another? And how does that work for you as a poet and stage performer?
Mm, I don't. Yeah, I think since I've started doing spoken word, to be honest, my writing has probably evolved towards writing for stage. I think a lot of the times now when I do write, I can see that it's evolved towards being something that can be performed. Whereas I think in the past, I definitely wrote more for page. And I think it's also like been a bit of a struggle for me, to be honest, just because like now when I write, I think it's harder for a reader versus someone who watches me perform to kind of get what I'm trying to, I guess, put across. Um, but yeah, when I guess my writing process now has really been to kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's a hard question. I think yeah. My answer is that it's ever since I started doing like spoken word, um, I've definitely been a bit more aware of like how a piece can be performed when I'm writing, versus just sort of the reader experience. And that goes to pieces that I've not even performed or don't necessarily plan to perform. I still in the back of my head now. I'm like, okay, if I was on stage, this is how I would like, yeah, this is like how I would, I guess, action it, or like this is what I would emphasize. So I think yeah, it is harder. And what do you think about that? I mean, yeah, I think it is harder once you start performing to go backwards and like write just for a sort of reader experience.
Here, I actually shared some of my own experiences with being across page and stage. For those of us who don't know, I am also a performance poet and I also try to write for page. And lately, I've been trying to get really into the page scene, and it feels very much like the rules are different for both. It feels very much like with performance, you have a lot more room for your words to be a little bit more imperfect as long as the delivery is on point. So you can write a poem that probably wouldn't look very sophisticated or cool or collected on the page, but if you delivered it in the right way, you have so much creative freedom that it could actually come out being absolutely brilliant. So there's a lot of emphasis on the way that you deliver your poetry, whereas on the page you really don't have a face, you don't have a cadence, so you have to really put a lot into the way that your words work. You have to make the most out of the words and how they come after each other, so your word order, your expression, things have to be a little bit tighter in terms of the language, and how that sometimes might create an accessibility issue. So the stage being more accessible to people whose English isn't their first language, who are not from areas where English is spoken in its most, in quotation marks, proper form, and how oftentimes, it's a wonder that people have such different ways of engaging with language, and that stage poetry is actually really revolutionary in the sense that it creates an accessibility that page poetry has never really, really had.
I think, yeah, we have the whole experience. I think is quite interesting. Also to watch people who I think going to slams and stuff who are rappers. And sometimes, yeah, like I wonder kind of what's going on in their head, like in terms of slowing it. Did they slow it down a bit for spoken word, or is rap is spoken word though? So like,
I shared a really fun fact here that RAP, RAP, actually stands for
yeah,
rhythm and poetry. So the idea is that it's actually spoken word poetry, but there's a rhythm behind it, which is kind of cool.
yeah, exactly. And I think I find like, I mean, a lot of people are gonna like hate me for this, but I do think like a really great writer, um, like I do think Eminem, for instance, is one of those writers who's a really good writer. Like I think the stories he's able to tell, but also like I do think in terms of like what he puts together lyrically, um, I think is really smart. Even to read it, like it is like the way he puts it together is really, I think smart. But yeah, like I think I guess like with words in general, we can be so playful with it, and sometimes we forget that. Like I think that's uh, in we go to school and stuff, and like there's a particular way to use language, and when people start moving or working outside those boxes, um, that's when the magic happens. And I've seen that like with, for instance, one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy, who won the Booker Prize, I think, in 1997 with The God of Small Things. And like at the time, a lot of people weren't able to like pick up on the language that she used because they were like, it's really difficult to read this. But now, so many years later, people are able to, I guess, digest it a bit better because the way she's used language, I think, was maybe ahead of her time.
As you've probably gathered from this interview, there was a lot of agreeing with what Alushka was saying because she did bring forward so many amazing, wonderful, valid points. And I feel very, very honoured to be able to be in conversation with Alushka and to be able to share that with you, because Alushka is actually just an amazing person and a formidable wordsmith and a wonderful conversationalist in that she shares so many insights that you wouldn't have otherwise considered if she hadn't brought them up. And I think, yeah, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to be in her presence and to be in conversation with her and to be able to share the knowledge and the insights and the back and forth that she creates. It's absolutely beautiful. The next question that I had for Alushka is, you have a diverse repertoire of poetry, from gentle romantic pieces to pieces that speak candidly of issues relating to identity and belonging. What is your approach to creating a new piece? Do you usually know where it's going before it is written, or do you let the piece guide you to what it becomes, or something entirely different? I shared a little bit about the fact that I tend to let my pieces do whatever they want. There are people who absolutely plan them out, and there are people who are in between. And the question was, is Alushka a little bit of both? Is she completely different? And what does her process look like, essentially?
No, definitely. I think for me, I know in the lead up what the piece will be about. And I generally, yeah, like when I start writing something, it is with the intention of being either a love poem or poem about identity or politics or just kind of, what's going on around me. So yeah, I think there's very few times when, as I've started writing the piece, it's evolved to being something different. Um, I think, yeah, very early some of the stuff that I was writing, I again, I think because when I started writing, right, and I would share with my friends and stuff, a lot of it was around like romance and things like that. And then as I got older, I started writing stuff that was more hard hitting. And I remember my friends being like, "Oh, this is a bit like rough. Like this is very different to what you've written before. And do you want to share this? Like, do you want to put this out there because it is quite like divisive?" Um, and I think, yeah, like initially I was a bit apprehensive. So I would like hold myself back a bit when I started getting into a poem and then start writing stuff that could be controversial. Um, but then I had a really interesting experience a few years ago. So when I did Slam, and the poem that I won with was obviously around like identity and race and cultural appropriation. And I went for a job interview not long after that. And the yeah, one of the managers who interviewed me, she said, "Oh, I watched your piece." It came up. Obviously, they did a Google search on me, and it came up. And I was like, "Oh shit!" But she was like, "No, like I'm really impressed. Like what you said, you don't hear a lot of young people of color, I guess, even in 2016 when this happened." Like she said, you know, I'm glad, like as a young person of color, that you're saying this because a lot of people don't have the courage to share stuff like this and then stick by it, and it's important that you do that. Um, so I think for me, that experience was quite positive, and I think it stuck with me because it made me realize then that it's a good thing then, like whether I apply for jobs or whatever it is, for an organization or for people to understand who I am outside of the work and what my values are and how I guess I will kind of bring that into hopefully the culture of the place that I'm working at, and hopefully, um, contribute to some of the conversations again around. I think particularly like how identity is treated in workplaces.
Here, in addition to, again, agreeing with Alushka, which I did a whole lot of, I offered some of my own experiences because these interviews are meant to be a conversation as opposed to a question and answer type situation.
Yeah.
And I talked a little bit about the fact that it feels very much like there is this desire within young people who are marginalized to say what they want and say it with conviction and share their experiences clearly. But in workplaces, that's still seen in some respect, especially when you talk about your own marginalization and any kind of revolt against the system or even a gentle call in of the system, that it seems that seems abrasive, that seems really, really combative. And often it's seen as, like, in quotation marks, not safe for work. And not in the way that it's inappropriate, in the way that it goes against, what the bosses at work might believe. It might go against the establishment that your workplace actually feeds into. And often there is a privilege in being able to speak your mind, and how that's actually really, really unfair in the sense that speaking your mind, especially when you're speaking your mind about experiences that you've had with a system that inevitably others you and inevitably makes you feel all of these really negative emotions, especially down to the core of your identity and your right to exist, is quite difficult to balance. And it's quite difficult to balance the idea of, if I say this thing about my identity and my experience with my identity in the context of so-called Australia, then and the workplace doesn't really like that, then I really don't want to work there. But then there are the financial pressures of, like, this is actually a privilege for me to be even able to have that thought, because the financial pressures mean that marginalized people are less likely to be able to keep up financially to begin with. So you're more often than not being silenced by the capitalist pressures, and how that's actually a really difficult set of thoughts to hold together a lot of the time as BIPOC artists who are also professionals.
Definitely. And then it's like, at the end of the day, I think as people of color, the one thing that, like, society still punishes us for is our conviction. Like, being able to stand by stuff we say, right? Like, I think that we're punished very heavily for that. And in a way, we have to, it's so important that we do it anyway, like, despite, you know, our way, because at the end of the day, there will be opportunities. Like, you gotta believe that there's better things for you out there, like, but if you back away from what your values are as a person, then you've already kind of lost yourself.
I hear in a very yes and kind of fashion, I brought up or veered the conversation into the territory of talking about the concept of privilege and how having privilege in and of itself as a person doesn't reflect on you negatively in terms of your actual person. It obviously is negative commentary on the societies and systems and structures that you are a part of and belong to, because obviously we are all meant to live in a system of equality where I don't have privilege over anyone else, nobody has privilege over me. But the idea that I do isn't because I'm a bad person or I have a horrible moral compass, most of the time. So the idea, though, is that with privilege comes very, very great responsibility. And as people, we exist in communities, and those of us who have the privilege, especially the financial privilege, to be able to speak out and have enough leeway to bear the brunt of the consequences, have almost a responsibility to speak out about our experiences, for the sake of those who have the same or similar experiences to us, but actually don't have that leeway to speak out and that power and that privilege.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying, this is the thing, is what you, and then, like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is, look, we do have the privilege, and I think because we have the privilege, we need to stick by it and use that privilege for those who don't.
Over here, you can see me excitedly saying, yes, yes, that's exactly the point. And it was very, very exciting to be able to sit down and engage in this conversation. And if you can't already hear it in my voice, I am super excited to share this with you because these conversations often don't have a lot of space to occur. And the idea of using whatever privilege we have to be able to share our experiences and create a world in which people who look like us and have similar experiences but maybe less privilege in other facets of their lives are able to see that, to see representation, but also see a world in which things get better because people are speaking out is really, really awesome. The next question I had for Alushka was, what advice would you give to your younger self or aspiring poets who want to come and do the thing?
I would say just go for it. Like, I think for a very long time, I was shy, I was scared, and like I'm still overcoming some of that. But yeah, get away from this idea of perfectionism, because I think that's the greatest of danger to your creativity, to your talent, um to your opportunities that that you have around you, and that you allow yourself to participate in. Is yeah, just get away from this idea of perfectionism. I recently listened to Elizabeth Gilbert's I think it's called Big Magic on audiobook. Um, and she makes such a like fantastic point about like do stuff because you want to do it. Like don't do it because you want other people's opinions, or you want the fame or the whatever it is. Like do it because you have a genuine love for what you're doing. Like if you are a shitty painter but you love painting, just paint. if you're if you think in your head you're like, you know what, I'm not a great poet, but you love poetry, just fucking go out and like do it. Like just do it. Like stop holding yourself back, um because you have this idea of perfectionism in your head, and like, or even I guess listening to what other people have to say about your work. At the end of the day, if it feels good to you, I think that's the most important thing. And then I think the second thing I would say, and I've said this, I think, to younger poets, is look at the opportunities away from like slam poetry. I think start off in spaces where you can just kind of exist and be yourself and share, and that's gonna help build your confidence. I think if you kind of get into the slam environment straight away, sometimes that can be a bit of a it can deter, I guess, from like your like yeah, it kind of just hears away from like the actual creativity and like building your processes, and again like understanding who you are as a poet. I think that's if I could go back in time, I would say take the time to be in environments where you can like learn to do that and figure out who you are. Because if you go into like a slam environment, sometimes you're going to be there's people who again, um this is their life, like and especially for people who are juggling multiple things, like working full time, and you're trying to find a place or space for creativity. You're gonna go along and you're gonna like compete with people who like maybe um spending hours a day practicing their craft, um and like have that's the whole, and I'm not saying that like you shouldn't do that or you can't do that. Definitely you can. Like there's space for everyone, in spoken word. But you gotta like understand that in a slam environment, it's like going into a sport, right? Even right, like if there's people who are like have the opportunity to put in hours every day, like and then do multiple training sessions, versus you who's coming in like trying to like balance full-time work and then put in a few hours of training. Like obviously you can't, like sometimes like it's not gonna align and that's gonna be frustrating for you. So like and put everything into perspective is like don't be harsh on yourself because you're not as like, you know, good as other people, or like you're not able to compete. And then again, the years of like taking up opportunities in, I guess, like spaces, different spaces, will give you those hours of practice.
Here, there was a little bit of a discussion about range and the ability to sometimes start in spaces like slam and really love slam for quite a while and then decide that maybe you want to sidestep and do something different. Maybe you want to go into songwriting, maybe you want to do page poetry, maybe you just want to go to open mics for a while, and how we are constantly evolving and changing as poets, and how more often than not, it also really depends on the audiences you are presenting to, and more often than not, as a BIPOC person presenting to ultimately majority white audiences in some instances can mean that your work is not valued in the way that you intend for it to be valued, or in the way that it essentially deserves, because often audiences are looking for access point, and their access point is how they experience the work and how they decide how good it is. If they don't relate to it, more often than not there is a sense of rejection there, and how that can be a factor in the way that we view our own work, and how that repeatedly can make you feel a little bit like your work is a bit subpar.
And I think as well, like let's not, I guess, sidestep the fact that with slams, over time, it's the same people who kind of come to it. Over time, it's like there is a sense of trying to be fair and stuff. I do think because there's a particular poet perhaps that you go and see month after month, you know, like you do develop a sense of like, okay, yeah, like what am I trying to say? Like there's a sense of favoritism sometimes that comes out, and it's look, at the end of the day, as humans, like we can try and say, oh, we're trying to be as fair as we want to be, as we can be, which we try perhaps, but like there is a sense of favoritism, and you do see that amongst like certain communities that develop. So like I'm not saying don't go to certain events because it's the same people all the time at those events. What I'm saying though is like also look around, like go and try everything. Don't just like stick to one event or one group of people and then think to yourself, oh, I'm shit because like I'm not, you know, like top dog here or whatever. Whereas like if you tried other things, or like as you said, like developed yourself in other ways, you might find that yeah, like other things are better suited to you.
Here, I thanked Alushka for being just such a great person to interview and such a great artist and a candidate for the first interview we ever recorded.
Yeah.
And then I went into explaining the speed round. So the speed round is a series of pre-written questions that we ask all of the people who come in, and we ask them to answer them as like the first thought that comes into their head. Because we don't have time to do like every single question that I've ever thought of, we usually ask them to pick 3 numbers.
Okay, let's do this.
Here, I asked Alushka to pick a number between 1 and 30, and then to answer the question with like whatever just came into her mind when it came up.
1 and 30, okay. 1, 6, 23, 29.
Question number 1 was actually, which celebrity or famous person through history would you want to befriend and why?
That's alive or like.
The person didn't really need to be alive. They could be alive or dead. They could even be a person who, you know, you knew in your own family history. It's not. It's a little bit of a loose question. It's just to get a little bit of insight into who you are.
I think again we aren't that Roy, like because I'm just so fascinated by her writing and her politics, and like how she like is quite obviously, she's famous for winning the Booker Prize for The God of Small Things. Her writing has been nonfiction and around like the Naxalite movement and like the socialist movement in India, and like how she's kind of one of those figures who even after 9/11, I think was very ahead of her time when she said, like, in a way, 9/11 represented the USA kind of starting to realize what the rest of the world feels like. Um, and like, I think, yeah, she wrote a speech called Come September, perhaps like after a year after 9/11 happened. And I just think, yeah, like she's always been so ahead of her time. Even during COVID, she wrote an amazing article about like how um the majority of people in India who will die will never be named, because the majority of people just like, they come from such poor backgrounds and stuff. And on the way, like, kind of, because India has this mass migration towards cities, all these people suddenly had to go back home during COVID because they didn't want them to like live in the slums and stuff, and then obviously go to work. So a lot of these people, they didn't have the money to sustain themselves, so they started going back to the villages. And on the way to the villages, they were also getting COVID and dying. So they were just like all these like sort of nameless people. So I just think, yeah, she's just brilliant in the way she sees the world, and like things that she's picked up on that other people, yeah, like would have taken years later to kind of go, oh, now I get what she's saying.
Question number 6 was, what's your favorite thing that you own and why? It can be absolutely anything as long as something that you own. You could have owned it in the past, and just give us a little bit of a why.
My favorite thing, can I have two things? I think my car, just because like I love driving and I love going on road trips and stuff, and I think it's just been like amazing to have that car. And I think also just be able to like fit friends in. Um, yeah, it's just such a perfect car for like traveling around and stuff. So I love it. And I think, yeah, this MacBook that I have, I bought it in 2017. I think it cost me about $3,000. It was a 15-inch, and it's still going good in 2020, 2022.
We had another slight technical difficulty here with the interwebs in the country not being the absolute best. Alushka's next Alushka's next question to answer was, if you could have an alter ego for yourself, who would it be and what would you name them?
Mm, an alter ego. Jeez. I would probably be like, I wouldn't say an alter ego, because like I do want to be this person one day. Is like just like this cool person who like skateboards everywhere, and like um yeah, it's just like badass in terms of saying stuff, and like just, yeah, I guess being saying stuff, and just again not second thinking it, like thinking twice about it, like just saying this is what I want, and this is I struggle with that sometimes. I struggle with that a lot. And what would my name be? I think maybe the only person in my life to call me this was my nanny. My nanny would call me Lucy. So I think, yeah, Lucy, the badass skateboarder who goes around and just says whatever she wants, obviously in a way that's not like hurting anyone.
Our last question for the whole interview was question 29, which was, what was the last thing that TikTok, Instagram, or any social media platform convinced you to buy? It could be absolutely anything as long as social media convinced you to buy it or purchase it or engage with it in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, jeez. The last thing. Actually, because we went to Sydney recently, um, I was looking at a lot of like food stuff before we went to Sydney, and then like when we were in Sydney, yeah, there was like so much food that we ate. But like good food. So we went the first night and had Ethiopian food. Yeah. So like I think just looking at like different like Sydney like food blogs and stuff, or like Instagram accounts. Um yeah, like I really wanted to try that. So I think food is the main thing that Instagram influences me to have to buy.
Here we came to the conclusion of our interview. I just wanted to send out a really big thank you to Alushka for being the first person we're able to interview, and wanted to say thank you to you, our audience, for consuming this and for engaging with it, and to say thank you for giving us grace. And we will see you at the next one.